This presentation is for Chapter 2, Job Order Costing. In Learning Objective 2, we are going to learn how to record materials and labor cost in a job order costing system. So how do materials and labor costs flow through the job order costing system? So companies will use a job cost record that will document the product cost for each job. So on this slide we see a completed job cost record for job 27 that shows the direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead that were applied to that specific job. This slide shows a diagram of how the materials and labor costs flow through the job order costing system. We first have our costs, which are the direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead that are going to be recorded on each of those job order cost records. As those costs begin to be incurred, they are entered into work in process inventory. So at any given time we could add up all of the incomplete job order cost records, and that should equal work in process inventory. As jobs are completed, then the costs are transferred from work in process to finished goods inventory, where they will remain until they are actually sold. Once the costs are sold, they will leave finished goods inventory and will be included as cost of goods sold, which is in the income statement. We have first, we will purchase the materials that we will store for usage later in production. As materials are entered into production, they will either be considered to be direct materials, that if you remember from Chapter 1 are going to be the materials that are easily and cost effectively traced to the products, or they're going to be indirect materials that are not going to be able to be traced individually to the products, and those will be accumulated in manufacturing overhead to be applied using a formula to the jobs. So as materials are purchased and then as materials are used in production, of course, those are usually going to be different amounts. This slide shows the T accounts for the beginning raw materials, work in process, and finished goods inventory for Smart Touch Learning. Then during the year, materials are going to be purchased. The journal entry that we see on the slide is a summary entry that would be for all of the raw materials inventory that would have been purchased during the year, and that would be a debit to raw materials inventory and then a credit to accounts payable if the items, of course, were purchased on account. This slide shows a raw materials subsidiary ledger just for Smart Touch Learning's batteries. So as the batteries are purchased, they're going to be recorded in the columns that show received, and then as they are issued into production, they are going to be in the columns under issued, and then we have a column that keeps up with the balance in the inventory accounts at any particular time after they've either been purchased, issued, or issued into production. At the bottom of the subsidiary ledger, you will see where there is a materials requisition that has been made for 15 batteries. So those are going to be batteries that are going to be used in job 27 as we will follow it through the process. Now at any given time we should be able to add up all of these raw materials subsidiary ledgers for all the different products that are going to be used in the manufacture of the tablets, and those should equal the control account for raw materials inventory. When we need materials to be entered into the production process, the production manager will probably be the one that will complete the materials requisition form, such as the one that we see on this slide. So that will give an instruction to the stores where the materials are being stored to release a certain number of or a certain amount of raw materials to go into a particular job. So this materials requisition form is going to provide a record of not only that the materials were requisitioned out of stores, but also to document which job they were used in. As those materials received on the production floor, then they will be entered onto that job cost record, and we see the entering in of those batteries on the job cost record for job 27. We also will need to make journal entries to show the materials that are entered into work in process inventory and manufacturing overhead. So again, this is going to be a summary entry for all of the materials that were used by Smart Touch Learning during the year. Now we notice that we have two different debits. If the materials are direct materials, they will go into work in process inventory when they are put into production. However, if they're indirect materials, they're first going to be debited to a temporary equity account called manufacturing overhead. And we will learn in a future learning objective how we will apply that manufacturing overhead to the individual jobs. The total of those two debits, of course, would be credited to raw materials inventory. So at the bottom of the slide, we can see the T accounts and see the credit for the raw materials inventory as it comes out of raw materials, and then we see the two debits, one into work in process for the direct materials and then one into manufacturing overhead for the indirect materials. Labor is usually going to be recorded in most companies using some type of an electronic system where the employees will either use an ID card or a ID number to enter their when they come to work and when they leave, and that information will automatically track to the individual jobs. However, if they use a manual system, then each employee will just keep a labor time record for themselves and show on there the amount of time that they spent on each individual job. So on this slide we can see the job cost record for job 27 and see where direct labor costs were entered in for that job. This slide shows us the journal entry or summary journal entry that would have been made for all of the labor costs incurred by Smart Touch Learning during 2026. And again, we see that we have two different debits. We will debit work in process inventory for our direct labor, the labor that we can directly track to the individual jobs like the assembly line workers, but we also see a debit to manufacturing overhead that's going to be for the indirect labor, and that's going to be the cost of the wages for employees that are supervisors, that are in maintenance, or maybe janitorial positions. So the total of both of those will be credited, of course, to wages payable. And at the bottom of the slide we can see the T account showing the total credit to wages payable, and then the two separate debits, the direct labor to work in process inventory, and then the indirect labor, of course, is being accumulated in manufacturing overhead. And that is the conclusion for the demonstration for Learning Objective 2.